Super Bowl VIII.
Super Bowl VIII was an American football game between the National Football Conference champion Minnesota Vikings and the American Football Conference champion Miami Dolphins to decide the National Football League champion for the 1973 season. The Dolphins defeated the Vikings by the score of 24-7 to win their second consecutive Super Bowl, the first team to do so since the Green Bay Packers in Super Bowls I and II. The game was played on January 13, 1974 at Rice Stadium in Houston, Texas. This was the first time that the Super Bowl site was not the site of a NFL franchise. This was also the first Super Bowl not to be held in either the Los Angeles, Miami, or New Orleans areas. This was the last Super Bowl, and next to last game overall. The 1974 Pro Bowl in Kansas City was the last, to feature goalpost at the front of the end zone. This was the Dolphins' third consecutive Super Bowl appearance. They posted a 12-2 record during the regular season, then defeated the Cincinnati Bengals and the Oakland Raiders in the playoffs. The Vikings were making their second Super Bowl appearance after also finishing the regular season with a 12-2 record, and posting postseason victories over the Washington Redskins and the Dallas Cowboys. Super Bowl VIII was largely dominated by the Dolphins, who scored 24 unanswered points during the first three quarters, including 2 touchdowns on their first 2 drives. Minnesota's best chance to threaten Miami occurred with less than a minute left in the first half, but Vikings running back Oscar Reed fumbled the ball away at the Dolphins' 6-yard, and his team was unable to overcome Miami's lead in the second half. The Dolphins' Larry Csonka became the first running back to be named Super Bowl MVP. Both his 145 rushing yards and his 33 carries were Super Bowl records.
Background: Miami Dolphins.
Although the Dolphins were unable to match their 17-0 perfect season of 1972, many sports writers, fans, and Dolphins players themselves felt that the 1973 team was better. While the 1972 team faced no competition that possessed a better record than 8-6 in the regular season, the 1973 team played a much tougher schedule that included games against the Oakland Raiders, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Dallas Cowboys, all playoff teams, plus 2 games against a resurgent Buffalo Bills squad that featured 2,000-yard rusher O.J. Simpson. Despite this, they still finished the 1973 season giving up fewer points, 150, than in 1972, and recorded a 12-2 record, including their opening game victory over the San Francisco 49ers that tied an NFL record with 18 consecutive wins. The Dolphins' winning streak ended in Week 2 with a 12-7 loss to the Raiders in Berkeley, California. Just like the 2 previous seasons, Miami's offense relied primarily on their rushing attack. Fullback Larry Csonka recorded his third consecutive 1,000 rushing yards season, 1,003 yards, while running back Mercury Morris rushed for 954 yards and scored 10 touchdowns. Running back Jim Keek was also a key contributor, rushing for 257 yards, and catching 27 passes for 208 yards. Quarterback Bob Grease, the AFC's second leading passer, completed only 116 passes for 1,422 yards, but threw more than twice as many touchdown passes, 17, as interceptions, 8, and earned an 84.3 passer rating. He became the first quarterback to start 3 Super Bowls and is joined by Jim Kelly as only quarterbacks to start at least 3 consecutive Super Bowls. Wide receiver Paul Warfield remained the main deep threat on the team, catching 29 passes for 514 yards and 11 touchdowns. Also, the offensive line was strong, once again led by center Jim Langer and right guard Larry Littrell. Grease, Csonka, Warfield, Langer, Nick Buoniconti and Little would all eventually be elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Miami's no-name defense continued to dominate their opponents. Future Hall of Fame linebacker Nick Buoniconti recovered 3 fumbles and returned 1 for a touchdown. Safety Dick Anderson led the team with 8 interceptions, which he returned for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns. and safety Jake Scott, the previous season's Super Bowl MVP, had 4 interceptions and 71 return yards. The Dolphins were still using their 53 defense devised at the beginning of the 1971 season, where Bob Matheson, number 53, would be brought in as a fourth linebacker in a 3-4 defense, with Manny Fernandez at nose tackle. Matheson could either rush the passer or drop back into coverage.
Minnesota Vikings.
The Vikings also finished the regular season with a 12-2 record, winning their first 9 games before a loss on Monday Night Football to the Atlanta Falcons. The Vikings' other loss was in Week 12 to the Cincinnati Bengals, whom the Dolphins defeated in the AFC Divisional Playoffs. Minnesota's offense was led by 13-year veteran quarterback Fran Tarkenton. During the regular season, Tarkenton completed 61.7% of his passes for 2,113 yards, 15 touchdowns, and just 7 interceptions. He also rushed for 202 yards and another touchdown. The team's primary deep threat was Pro Bowl wide receiver John Gilliam, who caught 42 passes for 907 yards, an average of 21.6 yards per catch, and scored 8 touchdowns. Tight end Stavoid was also a key element of the passing game, with 23 receptions for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Vikings' main weapon on their rushing game was NFL Rookie of the Year running back Chuck Foreman, who rushed for 801 yards, caught 37 passes for 362 yards, and scored 6 touchdowns. The Vikings had 4 other significant running backs, Dave Osborne, Bill Brown, Oscar Reed, and Ed Marinara combined for 1,469 rushing receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. The Vikings' offensive line was also very talented, led by Ron Yary and 6-time Pro Bowl player Mick Tingelhoff. Their defense was once again anchored by a defensive line nicknamed the Purple People Eaters, consisting of defensive tackles Gary Larson and Alan Page, and defensive ends Jim Marshall and Carl Eller. Behind them, cornerback Bobby Bryant, 7 interceptions, 105 return yards, 1 touchdown, and safety Paul Krause, 4 interceptions, led the defensive secondary.
Playoffs.
The Vikings earned their second appearance in the Super Bowl after defeating the wild-card Washington Redskins, 27-20, and the NFC Eastern champion Dallas Cowboys 27-10, in the playoffs. Meanwhile, the Dolphins defeated the AFC Central champion Cincinnati Bengals 34-16 in the divisional round, and the AFC Western champion Oakland Raiders, 27-10 for the AFC Championship. The Dolphins were the first team to appear in 3 consecutive Super Bowls.
Super Bowl pregame news and notes.
This was the first Super Bowl in which a former AFL franchise was the favorite. The 1970 AFC champion Baltimore Colts had been the favorite in Super Bowl V, but they were an original NFL franchise prior to the 1970 merger. This was also the first Super Bowl played in a stadium that was not the current home to an NFL or AFL team, as no team had called Rice Stadium home since the Houston Oilers moved into the Astrodome. The Vikings complained about their practice facilities at a Houston high school, a 20-minute bus ride from their hotel. They said the locker room was cramped, uncarpeted, had no lockers, and that most of the shower heads didn't work. The practice field had no blocking sleds. "I don't think our players have seen anything like this since junior high school," said Vikings head coach Bud Grant. There were reports of dissension among the Dolphin team arising from owner Joe Robbie's decision to allow married players to bring their wives at the club's expense. The single players were reportedly angry that they couldn't bring their girlfriends or mothers. Paul Warfield entered the game with a well-publicized hamstring injury in his left leg. Minnesota Vikings defensive tackle Alan Page and Miami Dolphins left guard Bob Kuechenberg were former teammates at the University of Notre Dame. Kuechenberg would be blocking Page in Super Bowl VIII. Kuechenberg entered the game with a broken arm which was injured in a game played against the Baltimore Colts and wore a cast on that arm throughout the game. On television before the game, New York Jets quarterback Joe Namath said, "If Miami gets the kickoff and scores on the opening drive, the game is over." Indeed, the Dolphins became the first team to score a touchdown after receiving the game's opening kickoff. For this game, the Miami Dolphins were assigned the home team. The Dolphins wear white jerseys at home typically for day games, but due to a, since changed, uniform policy, the Dolphins were obligated to wear their aqua jerseys as the designated home team, although Miami wore its aqua jerseys for its final regular season home game, on a Saturday afternoon, that season versus the Detroit Lions. Also, many Dolphin players wore a slightly different helmet decal than the rest. Starting with the final regular season game of the 1973 season, and continuing throughout the playoffs, many players, mostly linemen, wore the decal that the team would adopt in 1974, with the mascot dolphin leaping through the sun, while others wore helmets with the 1969 to 1973 decal, with the mascot dolphin halfway through the sun. Famed Gonzo writer Hunter S. Thompson covered the game for Rolling Stone magazine, and his exploits in Houston are legendary. This was the only Super Bowl in which the game ball had stripes. Until the late 1970s, stripes were permissible for NFL footballs for night games and other special situations.
Television and entertainment.
The game was televised in the United States by CBS with play-by-play announcer Ray Scott and color commentators Pat Summerall and Bart Starr. This was Scott's final telecast for CBS. Midway through the following season, Summerall would take Scott's place as the network's lead play-by-play announcer, holding that position through 1993, when CBS lost rights to the NFC television package to Fox. The Longhorn Band from the University of Texas at Austin performed during the pregame festivities. Later, country music singer Charlie Pride sang the national anthem. The halftime show also featured the Longhorn Band, along with Judy Mallett, Miss Texas, 1973, playing the fiddle, in a tribute to American music titled A Musical America.
Game summary.
The Dolphins' game plan on offense was to use misdirection, negative influence traps, and cross-blocking to exploit the Vikings' defense's excellent pursuit. The Kansas City Chiefs had used similar tactics against the same Vikings defensive line in Super Bowl IV. Wrote Jim Langer, "All this was successful right away. We kept ripping huge holes into their defense and Csonka kept picking up good yardage, especially to the right. We'd hear Allen cussing because those negative influence plays were just driving him nuts. He didn't know what the hell to do." On defense, the Dolphins' goal was to neutralize Chuck Foreman by using cat-quick Manny Fernandez at nose tackle and to make passing difficult for Tarkenton by double-teaming John Gilliam and knocking down his receivers. They were also depending on defensive ends Bill Stanfill and Van Den Herder to contain Tarkenton's scrambling. As they had the two previous Super Bowls, the Dolphins won the coin toss and elected to receive. The Dolphins dominated the Vikings right from the beginning, scoring touchdowns on two 10-play drives in the first quarter. Said Jim Langer, "It was obvious from the beginning that our offense could overpower their defense. First, Dolphins defensive back Jake Scott gave his team good field position by returning the opening kickoff 31 yards to the Miami 38-yard line. Then Mercury Morris ran right for 4 yards, Larry Csonka crashed through the middle for 2, and quarterback Bob Grease completed a 13-yard pass to tight end Jim Mandich to advance the ball to the Vikings' 43-yard line. Csonka then ran on second down for 16 yards, then Grease completed a 6-yard pass to receiver Marlon Briscoe to the 21-yard line. 3 more running plays, 2 by Csonka and 1 by Morris, moved the ball to the Vikings' 5-yard line. Csonka then finished the drive with a 5-yard touchdown run. Then, after forcing Minnesota to punt after 3 plays, the Dolphins went 56 yards in 10 plays, aided with 3 runs by Csonka for 8, 12, and 8 yards, and Grease's 13-yard pass to Briscoe, to score on running back Jim Keek's 1-yard run, his only touchdown of the season, to give them a 14-0 lead. By the time the first quarter ended, Miami had run 20 plays for 118 yards and 8 first downs, and scored touchdowns on their first two possessions. Meanwhile, the Miami defense held the Minnesota offense to only 25 yards, 6 plays from scrimmage and 1 first down. The Vikings did not cross their own 23-yard line. The situation never got much better for the Vikings the rest of the game. After each team traded punts early in the second period, Miami mounted a 7-play drive starting from their own 35-yard line, culminating in a 28-yard field goal from kicker Giro Yepremian to make the score 17-0 midway through the second quarter. On the first play of the drive, Minnesota was penalized 15 yards for unsportsmanlike conduct on linebacker Wally Hilgenberg, who threw an elbow through Csonka's face mask, cutting Csonka above the eye. The Vikings then had their best opportunity to score in the first half on their ensuing drive. Starting at their own 20-yard line, Minnesota marched to the Miami 15-yard line in 9 plays, aided by Fran Tarkenton's completions of 17 and 14 yards to tight end Stavoig and wide receiver John Gilliam's 30-yard reception. Tarkenton's 8-yard run on first down then advanced the ball to the 7-yard line. But on the next 2 plays, Vikings running back Oscar Reed gained only 1 yard on 2 rushes, bringing up a 4th down and 1 with less than a minute left in the half. Instead of kicking a field goal, Minnesota attempted to convert the 4th down with another running play by Reed. However, Reed lost the ball while being tackled by linebacker Nick Berniconti, and Scott recovered the fumble. Jim Langer wrote that at halftime, "We definitely knew that this game was over." Gilliam returned the second-half kickoff 65 yards, but a holding penalty on the play moved the ball all the way back to the Minnesota 11-yard line. 2 plays later, Tarkenton was sacked for a 6-yard loss by defensive tackle Manny Fernandez on 3rd down, forcing Minnesota to punt from their own 7-yard line. Scott then returned the punt 12 yards to the Minnesota 43-yard line. Miami then marched 43 yards in 8 plays to score on Csonka's 2-yard touchdown run through Hilgenberg to increase their lead to 24-0 with almost 9 minutes left in the third quarter. The key play was Grease's 3rd and 5, 27-yard pass to wide receiver Paul Warfield to the Minnesota 11-yard line. It was Grease's last pass of the game and only Warfield's second, and last, catch of the game. Because of his hamstring injury, Warfield had earlier been limping through primarily decoy routes. After an exchange of punts, Minnesota got the ball back at their 43-yard line after Larry Seipel's kick went just 24 yards. They mounted a 10-play, 57-yard drive, with Tarkenton completing 5 passes for 43 yards, including a 15-yarder to tight end Stavoig on 3rd and 8, and taking the into the end zone himself on a 4-yard touchdown run. Minnesota recovered their ensuing onside kick, but an offsides penalty on the Vikings nullified the play, and they subsequently kicked deep. Miami went 3 and out, and Minnesota got the ball back at their own 3-yard line. 8 plays later the Vikings reached a Miami 32-yard line. After 2 incomplete passes, Tarkenton's pass intended for wide receiver Jim Lash was intercepted by Dolphins cornerback Curtis Johnson at the goal line. Miami got the ball back at their 10-yard line with 6:24 left in the game, and Csonka and Kiek then ran out the clock. With less than 4 minutes to play, a frustrated Alan Page was called for a personal foul for a late hit on Grease, and then 1 play later both Page and Kuechenberg were given offsetting personal fouls after getting in a scuffle with each other. Wrote Jim Langer, "We just hit the Vikings defense so hard and so fast that they didn't know what hit them." Alan Page later said he knew we would dominate them after only the first couple of plays. Grease finished the game with just 6 out of 7 pass completions for 73 yards. Miami's 7 pass attempts were the fewest ever thrown by a team in the Super Bowl. The Dolphins rushed for 196 yards, did not have any turnovers, and were not penalized in the first 52 minutes. Tarkenton set what was then a Super Bowl record for completions, 18 out of 28 for 182 yards, with 1 interception, and rushed for 17 yards and a touchdown. Reed was the leading rusher for the Vikings, but with just 32 yards. Tight end Stavoig was the top receiver of the game with 3 catches for 46 yards. The Vikings' lethargic performance was very similar to their performance in their loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl IV.
Box score.
Date: January 13, 1974. Game time: 2:30 p.m. CST. Game weather: 50 DEGF, 10 DEGC, overcast.
Final statistics.
Source: NFL.com. Super Bowl VIII.
Individual leaders.
1 completions, attempts, 2 carries, 3 long gain, 4 receptions.
Super Bowl post-game news and notes.
In the Dolphins' locker room after the game, Csonka was asked about his battered face. Without naming Hilgenberg, he said, "It was a cheap shot, but an honest cheap shot. He came right at me and threw an elbow right through my mask. I could see the game meant something to him." With their 32-2 record over 2 years, the still young Dolphins appeared to have established a dynasty. In 1974, however, their offense was hurt by injuries to Csonka and the offensive line, and the defense was hurt by the departure of defensive coordinator Bill Anspacher, who became the New York Giants head coach. The Dolphins finished 11-3 but lost a dramatic playoff game, the Sea of Hands, to the Oakland Raiders. In 1975, Csonka, Kiick, and Warfield left to join the World Football League. The Dolphins would not win another playoff game until 1982. They would appear in 2 more Super Bowls, but they have not won since.
Starting lineups.
Source:
Officials.
Referee, Ben Drieth, number 12. Umpire, Ralph Moorcroft, number 15. Head linesman, Leo Miles, number 35. Line judge, Jack Fett, number 39. Field judge, Fritz Graf, number 34. Back judge, Stan Javy, number 29. Note: a 7-official system was not used until the 1978 season. Leo Miles was the first African American to officiate in a Super Bowl.